Today, we're going to open up what I like to call the brain's toolkit. We're diving into psychopharmacology, which is really the science of how these tiny, carefully designed molecules can help recalibrate the incredibly complex chemistry of our minds.
I mean, just try to picture it. Billions of neurons are firing off messages at lightning speed, and they're doing it using these chemical signals called neurotransmitters. It's this beautiful, chaotic, high-speed conversation that literally shapes every single thought, feeling, and action you have. It's the most sophisticated communication network we know of, period.
But what happens when that chemical conversation goes wrong? When the signals are way too loud, or maybe too quiet, or just totally garbled. Well, that can lead to some really profound challenges, and that's exactly where psychopharmacology comes in, offering tools that are designed to help get that crucial balance back. So here's our game plan for this guided tour. We're going to start with treatments for psychosis and mania. Then we'll explore a really powerful class of drugs for depression. We'll also get into the critical, delicate balance of risk during pregnancy, and wrap things up by looking at how we protect the aging brain. Okay, first stop. We're focusing on conditions like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. These are cases where medications are trying to stabilize the very core chemical signaling systems that have, for whatever reason, gone off the rails. Let's kick things off with a question for you. Which one of these is what we call a second-generation antipsychotic for treating schizophrenia? Is it A, haloperidol, B, risperidone, C, chlorpromazine, or D, thioridazine? Now, these drugs get grouped into generations based on how they work, so think about which one might be the newer approach. If you said risperidone, you got it. But, the real question isn't just what the answer is, but why. What actually makes it second generation? Well, the secret is all in which chemical pathways it decides to target in the brain. Let's break that down.
So what's so fascinating here is the difference in strategy. The first-generation drugs like haloperidol were kind of like sharpshooters. They went right after dopamine. But the second-generation drugs like risperidone have this dual action. They target both dopamine and serotonin receptors. And that broader approach often completely changes the side effect profile, which, let me tell you, is a huge deal for a patient's quality of life.
All right, let's switch gears a bit to bipolar disorder. If someone is experiencing an acute manic episode, what's a typical first-line treatment to help bring back some stability? Is it A, lithium, B, valproate, C, olanzapine, or E, lamotrigine? And the answer is valproate. Now, you might have immediately thought of lithium for bipolar disorder, and you're not wrong, it's a super important long-term stabilizer. But for getting an acute manic episode under control, valproate is very often the go-to choice. It's actually an anticonvulsant that just happens to be a really powerful mood stabilizer too. Okay, on to our second section. We're going to talk about depression now, but we're going to zero in on a specific class of drugs that takes a really different strategic approach, one that's often used when other treatments just haven't worked. So a lot of people have heard of SSRIs, like fluoxetine, right? But this question is about an older but very potent class of antidepressants called MAOIs. So which one of these is an MAOI? Is it A, fluoxetine, B, tranylcypromine, C, amitriptyline, or E, bupropion? And yep, the correct answer is tranylcypromine. It's a classic MAOI. But look, knowing the name is one thing. Understanding how it actually works is where things get really cool. And this explains it perfectly. So think of it this way. Your brain has this natural cleanup crew. It's an enzyme called monoamine oxidase, or MAO. Its job is to remove neurotransmitters after they've done their work. Well, an MAOI drug comes along and basically tells that cleanup crew to take a coffee break. By blocking the enzyme, it lets those mood-regulating messengers like serotonin and dopamine hang around longer, which boosts their overall effect. So, the really crucial takeaway here is that different antidepressants have totally different jobs. The other drugs from our quiz all work in their own way. SSRIs, like fluoxetine, are basically gatekeepers just for serotonin. Others are less selective. It's all about finding the exact right tool for a person's specific chemical needs. Now we're moving into our third topic, and this is a really, really important one, where treatment decisions can have consequences that literally extend to the next generation. This is all about managing a medical condition while also protecting a developing life. Before we get to the next question, we have to be absolutely clear on this term, teratogenicity. It's the scientific word for the risk that a substance, like a medication, could interfere with a fetus's development and cause birth defects. It's a factor that weighs incredibly heavily in any prescription for a woman who is or might become pregnant. So with that definition fresh in our minds, let's look at 4 common anti-epileptic drugs: Valproate, Levetiracetam, Carbamazepine, and Lamotrigine. For a patient who's planning to have a family, which one of these carries the highest documented risk to a fetus?
And the answer is A, Valproate. That's right, the same drug we just saw being used for acute mania carries the highest known risk of teratogenic effects among these options, including really serious things like neural tube defects. Knowing this is it's absolutely critical for safe prescribing and for making sure patients are fully informed.
And this chart, wow, it makes the risk profile just crystal clear. I mean, look at that difference. Valproate's way out there in the high-risk category, while other meds like Carbamazepine and especially Levetiracetam are considered much safer alternatives during pregnancy. It's just a stark visual reminder of why choosing the right medication can be a truly life-altering decision. For our final section, let's shift our focus to neurodegenerative disease. In this case, the goal isn't just about balancing chemicals for mood, but about actively protecting the brain's structure and function from the relentless march of diseases like Alzheimer's. So, treatments for Alzheimer's symptoms often fall into one of 2 main camps. This question is about one of those strategies, targeting something called the NMDA receptor. So which of these drugs uses that unique mechanism? Is it Donepezil, rivastigmine, Memantine, or Tacrine? So, which one was it? The correct answer is D, Memantine. And this slide shows us exactly why it's different. See, on one hand, you've got drugs like Donepezil that work by boosting a signal. They increase a key neurotransmitter for memory. But Memantine's strategy is totally different. It's protective. It basically acts like a shield to stop brain cells from getting damaged by what you could call an overloaded circuit of another chemical. It is a fundamentally different approach to the exact same problem.
And really, that's what this is all about, isn't it? Every single medication is like a specific key, designed for a very specific lock in the brain. And the more we understand about how each key is shaped and what door it opens, the better we're going to get at navigating the incredible complexities of the mind.
We've just covered some of the key mechanisms in today's toolkit, from antipsychotics to Alzheimer's drugs. But science, of course, never ever stops. And that leaves us with a final, and I think crucial question to think about. What will the next generation of these tools even look like? And what new doors will they allow us to unlock?